The text message jolted me physically, a sudden tightness in my chest as if someone had cranked a vise around my ribcage. My vision tunneled until the phone screen was the only thing in focus, the rest of my corner office on the 42nd floor blurring at the edges. "Hey sis, hope you don't mind, but I sold your Honda for $5,000. You never drive it anyway, and I really needed the cash. Thanks for understanding." Ha ha ha. I read the message 3 times, each pass sending a new wave of disbelief crashing through me. The quarterly reports I'd been analyzing lay forgotten as I slowly placed my coffee cup on the desk with deliberate precision, afraid that if I moved too quickly I might shatter something, or someone. What my brother Victor thought he had sold for $5,000 wasn't my old Honda. It was a 2019 McLaren 720S Spider worth $347,000, registered as a company asset to Apex Capital Management, the $4.2 billion investment firm I'd built from nothing over 6 years, while my family remained completely unaware. My name is Natalie. I'm 34 and the secret CEO of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm. This is the story of how I exposed a family betrayal that cost my brother everything. For 6 years, I'd maintained 2 separate lives. To the business world, I was Natalie Parker, ruthless financial prodigy and founder of Apex Capital Management. To my family, I was just Natalie, the daughter who worked some mid-level finance job and lived in a modest apartment across town. I'd kept my success hidden deliberately. No mansions, no flashy lifestyle around them, just the old Honda Civic I drove to family gatherings. The McLaren was strictly for business purposes, client meetings, and industry events. No one in my family had ever seen it, until Victor apparently found the keys I'd accidentally left at our parents' house after dinner 2 weeks ago. I picked up my phone and typed a single word. "Interesting." Then I pressed the intercom. "Rebecca, please get Thomas Bennett from legal on the line immediately and cancel my 4 p.m. meeting. Something urgent has come up." While waiting for the call, I pulled up the vehicle documentation on my computer. The McLaren was registered to Apex Capital Management with me as the authorized driver, purchased as a company asset for client entertainment. This wasn't just car theft. It was federal grand theft auto of corporate property. The phone rang. "Thomas, I need you to listen carefully because this is going to sound unbelievable." "What's the situation, Natalie?" "My brother just texted me to inform me that he sold company vehicle VIN SAJAD 4GX5CN01234 for $5,000. "The McLaren? He sold the McLaren?" The disbelief in Thomas's voice mirrored my own internal state. Apparently, he thought it was my personal Honda Civic. After a long pause, Thomas spoke slowly. "Natalie, that's a $350,000 vehicle registered as company property. That's not just theft, that's major felony theft of corporate assets." "I'm aware. What's our protocol for this situation?" "We have to report it immediately. Federal law requires us to report theft of company assets over $100,000 within 24 hours. The FBI handles cases involving interstate commerce and vehicles of this value." I stared at Victor's cheerful text message again, complete with that smiling emoji that now seemed like a slap in the face. "Thomas, file the report immediately. Include the text message as evidence and request that they move quickly before the vehicle leaves the jurisdiction." "Natalie, you realize this means your brother will be arrested." A cold resolve settled over me. My brother stole a company car worth $350,000. The law is the law. But surely he didn't know. Thomas' ignorance of the value doesn't change the fact that he took someone else's property without permission and sold it. File the report. After hanging up, I walked to the window of my office, looking out at the city skyline while processing how we'd gotten to this point. Victor was my younger brother by 3 years. For his entire adult life, he'd operated under the assumption that I was his struggling older sister who worked some boring finance job. He worked as a sales manager at a furniture store and was constantly in financial trouble, living paycheck to paycheck, mounting credit card debt, and a gambling problem he thought no one knew about. He'd been borrowing money from various family members for months, always with elaborate stories about temporary setbacks and promises to pay everyone back. Last week, he'd asked to borrow my Honda to help a friend move furniture. I'd agreed, assuming he meant the actual Honda Civic I kept in my apartment building's garage. Instead, he'd somehow gotten hold of the McLaren keys. My phone buzzed with another text from Victor. The buyer seemed really excited about the car, said something about it being a rare model. Anyway, thanks again for being cool about this. I stared at the message in disbelief. The buyer had probably just acquired a $350,000 supercar for $5,000 and was undoubtedly thrilled. Victor, meanwhile, had no idea he'd just committed a federal felony. Rebecca knocked on my door. "Ms. Parker, I have Agent Olivia Martinez from the FBI Financial Crimes Division on line 1. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. "Agent Martinez, thank you for calling so quickly." "Ms. Parker, I've reviewed the initial report from your legal team. Can you confirm that your brother took and sold a 2019 McLaren 720S Spider without your knowledge or permission?" "That's correct. He sent me a text message approximately an hour ago informing me that he'd sold what he thought was my Honda Civic for $5,000. The vehicle is registered as a company asset." "Yes, to Apex Capital Management. We're going to need to move quickly on this. Do you know the identity of the buyer?" "No, but my brother mentioned that the buyer seemed excited about getting a rare model. I suspect the buyer knew exactly what they were purchasing." "That suggests potential conspiracy or receipt of stolen goods. We'll need to interview your brother immediately to get the buyer's information." "Agent Martinez, I should mention that my brother has no idea about the actual value of the car or my business. He genuinely believes he sold a worthless old Honda." "That doesn't change the legal situation, Ms. Parker. Theft is theft, regardless of the perpetrator's knowledge of the item's value." "I understand. I just wanted you to be aware of the circumstances." "We'll be in touch within the next few hours. Please don't contact your brother or anyone else about this until we've had a chance to investigate." At 6:30 p.m., my phone rang with my mother's number. The moment I'd been dreading had arrived. "Natalie, something terrible has happened. FBI agents came to Victor's apartment and arrested him. They said something about car theft, but that doesn't make any sense. Victor doesn't steal cars." I closed my eyes and pressed my fingertips against my temples. "Mom, where are you now?" "At the police station with your father. Victor is asking for a lawyer, but we don't understand what's happening. The agents mentioned your name. They said you filed a complaint." "Mom, I need you and Dad to sit down. I'm going to explain everything, but it's complicated." "Natalie, please just tell me what's going on." "Victor borrowed what he thought was my Honda Civic. Instead, he took and sold a McLaren that belongs to my company. It's worth about $350,000. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. "Natalie, that's not possible. You don't own a $350,000 car." "Actually, Mom, I do. And it's not the only one." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your daughter, who you think works a regular office job, actually runs a $4.2 billion investment firm." Another long silence. "Natalie, this isn't the time for jokes." "I'm not joking, Mom. I'm the CEO of Apex Capital Management. I have been for 6 years. But you live in that little apartment. You drive that old Honda." "Because I chose to keep my success private from the family, because I wanted to see who you all were when you thought I had nothing. And now Victor is in jail." Victor committed federal grand theft auto. He stole company property and sold it illegally. But he didn't know. That doesn't change the law, Mom. I could hear my father's voice in the background asking what was happening. Mom put me on speaker. "Dad needs to hear this too, Natalie." "Natalie?" Dad's voice came through clearly. "Can you explain what's happening to your brother?" "Dad, Victor asked to borrow what he thought was my old Honda. Instead, he took a McLaren worth $350,000 that's registered as company property. He sold it for $5,000 and texted me about it like it was no big deal." "A McLaren, Natalie? How do you have a McLaren?" "Because I own Apex Capital Management. It's an investment firm worth $4.2 billion. I could hear both my parents talking at once, their voices overlapping in confusion and disbelief. "Listen," I said loudly enough to cut through their conversation. I know this is shocking, but right now we need to focus on Victor. He's going to need a very good lawyer, and he's going to need one immediately. Natalie, Dad's voice was strained. Can you help him? Can you drop the charges? Dad, it's not that simple. Once a theft of this magnitude is reported, it becomes a federal matter. I can't just drop the charges. But you could try. I could talk to the prosecutor about Victor's circumstances and his lack of knowledge about the car's value. But Dad, he still committed a serious crime. Over the next 2 hours, I found myself coordinating my brother's legal defense, while simultaneously trying to explain to my parents how their daughter had become a billionaire without them noticing. I arranged for Victor to be represented by Jessica Williams, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the city. I also called Agent Martinez to provide additional context about Victor's financial situation and gambling problems. Agent Martinez, I want to be clear that I'm not trying to excuse my brother's actions, but I think you should know that he has significant gambling debts and has been desperate for money. That actually makes the situation worse, Ms. Parker. It establishes motive for the theft. I understand, but I also think you should know that he genuinely had no idea what he was selling. If he'd known it was worth $350,000, he wouldn't have sold it for $5,000. We'll take that into consideration during our investigation. The next morning, I received a call from Jessica Williams. Natalie, I've met with your brother. He's in complete shock about the situation. What's his status? He's been charged with federal grand theft auto and conspiracy to commit wire fraud since he sold the vehicle across state lines using online platforms. The conspiracy charge relates to the buyer, who we believe knew the car's actual value. What's he looking at in terms of sentencing? If convicted on all charges, potentially 10 to 15 years in federal prison. I felt sick to my stomach. Jessica, what can we do? The prosecutor is willing to consider a plea deal if Victor cooperates fully in recovering the vehicle and identifying the buyer. They're also interested in information about any other stolen property transactions. Other transactions? Natalie, it appears your brother has been involved in several questionable sales over the past few months. The FBI is investigating whether this was part of a larger stolen property operation. This was getting worse by the hour. That afternoon, I drove to the federal detention center to visit Victor. He looked terrible, pale, shaken, and about 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. Natalie, I don't understand any of this. They're saying I stole a $350,000 car, but I swear I thought it was just your old Honda. Victor, where did you get the keys? From the key hook at Mom and Dad's house. There were 2 sets of car keys hanging there. I took the ones that looked newer. The newer keys were for the McLaren. But why did you have a McLaren at Mom and Dad's house? I looked at my brother through the reinforced glass, realizing that the conversation we were about to have would change our relationship forever. Because I drove it to family dinner 2 weeks ago, because I own several cars and that's the one I happened to take that day. Natalie, this doesn't make sense. How do you own a McLaren? You work in finance. Victor, I don't just work in finance. I own a finance company, a big one. I spent the next 30 minutes explaining Apex Capital Management, my role as founder and CEO, and the scope of my business success. Victor listened with an expression of growing amazement and horror as he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. Natalie, you're saying you're rich, like really rich. I'm saying I'm very successful, and the car you sold was worth more than most people's houses. But why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were just getting by? Because I wanted to see who you all really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you. And now I know that when you needed money, instead of asking your successful sister for help, you decided to steal what you thought was my worthless car. Victor put his head in his hands. Natalie, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know you didn't. But Victor, this isn't just about the car. The FBI thinks you've been involved in other stolen property sales. What? Oh, Natalie, I've never stolen anything before in my life. Then explain the investigation into your eBay sales. Explain the electronics and jewelry you've been selling online over the past few months. Victor's face went pale. Those weren't stolen. Those were items I won gambling. You won $50,000 worth of electronics and jewelry gambling. Natalie, I know how it sounds, but I swear those were legitimate winnings. I looked at my brother and realized he was probably telling the truth about the other items, but lying to himself about his gambling problem being under control. Victor, the FBI is going to want documentation of every item you've sold and where you got it. If you really won everything gambling, you'll need to provide proof. Over the next week, the investigation expanded as the FBI traced the McLaren to a sophisticated car theft ring operating across 3 states. The buyer who'd purchased the car from Victor was actually a known fence who specialized in high-end vehicles. Victor's cooperation led to the arrest of 6 other people and the recovery of over $2 million worth of stolen vehicles. In exchange for his assistance, the prosecutor agreed to reduce the charges to a single count of grand theft with a recommendation for probation and community service. But the real reckoning came at the family meeting I called for the following Sunday. I gathered my parents, Victor, and my sister Jennifer at Mom and Dad's house to have the conversation we should have had years ago. Before we talk about Victor's situation, I need to address the bigger issue here. I began. For 6 years, I've been living a double life. You've all thought I was struggling financially, while I've actually been building a multi-billion-dollar business. Jennifer was the first to speak. Natalie, are you seriously telling us you're rich and you've been pretending to be poor? I'm telling you that I built something extraordinary, and I wanted to see if my family would love and support me when they thought I had nothing to offer. And what did you learn? Dad asked. I learned that when Victor needed money, he chose to steal from me rather than ask for help. I learned that none of you ever asked about my goals, my dreams, or what I was working toward. I learned that you all made assumptions about my life based on external appearances. Victor looked up from the table. Natalie, if I'd known about your success, I never would have taken the car. Victor, if you'd known about my success, you would have asked me for money instead of gambling it away. You still wouldn't have addressed the real problem. What real problem? Your gambling addiction, your inability to manage money, your pattern of making desperate decisions when you're in trouble. The conversation that followed was difficult, but necessary. Victor admitted to gambling debts totaling over $80,000. Jennifer revealed that she'd been loaning him money for months. My parents confessed that they'd been worried about both of their children, Victor because of his obvious financial problems, and me because they thought I was failing to achieve my potential. The irony, I told them, is that you were worried about the wrong child. Natalie, Mom said, we're proud of your success, but we're hurt that you didn't trust us with the truth. Mom, the truth is that I built something incredible while you all assumed I was failing. The truth is that when Victor needed help, his first instinct was to take what he thought was my worthless possession rather than ask his family for support. But we would have helped him, Dad protested. Would you? With what money? None of you had any idea that I could have solved Victor's problems with a single phone call. 6 months later, Victor completed his community service and started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I hired him as a junior analyst at Apex Capital Management with the understanding that any relapse into gambling would result in immediate termination. The McLaren was eventually recovered, though it required significant repairs after being damaged during the police chase that ended the car theft ring's operation. My relationship with my family improved dramatically once everything was out in the open. I moved out of my modest apartment and into a penthouse that reflected my actual financial situation. I started driving my luxury cars to family events instead of the Honda Civic. But the most important change was that we began having honest conversations about money, success, and what it means to support each other as a family. Victor called me one evening about a year after his arrest. Natalie, I need to ask you something. What's that? Do you think you'll ever really forgive me for what I did? I considered the question. Victor, I forgave you the day it happened, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. What does it mean? It means I gave you a second chance to show me who you really are. It means I chose to believe you could learn from your mistakes and become better. And have I become better? You tell me. You've been clean for a year. You're working hard. You're paying back your debts. You're making good choices. I am. And Natalie, thank you for not giving up on me. That's what family does, Victor. Real family doesn't give up on each other, but real family also doesn't steal from each other. I know. I'm sorry it took me getting arrested to figure that out. The experience taught me something important about family dynamics and the difference between love and respect. My family had always loved me, but they hadn't respected me when they thought I was unsuccessful. Victor had taken the car because he saw me as someone whose possessions didn't matter, whose success didn't exist, whose life could be disrupted without consequences. Now our relationships were built on mutual respect and honest communication. Victor understood that actions have consequences regardless of intentions. My parents understood that success comes in many forms and assumptions can be dangerous. And I understood that sometimes the most expensive lesson isn't the one you pay for, it's the one you teach. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, check out some audiobooks. They're a great way to absorb knowledge on the go.